Hey guys, it's Elena. I've been a bit sporadic with videos lately, but I've really been itching to get back into a little bit of play and take you guys along with me in case it inspires you to do something similar. I'm just going to play with my watercolors a little bit, and you can do this with any brushes that you have, mine or otherwise. This is basically just a way to loosen up your creativity or otherwise just get used to using Procreate in the first place. You don't even have to do this digitally, it works with any kind of medium. So let's go ahead and get started. So what I have open here is the one that I did previously, and I'm just going to show you how I did something like this. We're going to be using my free watercolor canvas. This is just kind of a standard watercolor canvas. It's 16 by 20 inches, I believe, or 20 by 16 inches. This is landscape mode. I've just rotated it. We've got two different layers. We've got the paper itself, and then we've got the paint here layer. This is just a standard layer other than the blend mode has been set to multiply. And this makes it look more like watercolor. You don't have to use this, but this is just what I'm using, and this is free if you want it. It's in the description. I'm going to be using my watercolor rainbow color palette, and that's also free with the link in the description. So I've got my watercolor brush set here. It's called Amazing Watercolor, and there's a link for that in the description as well. That one is not free. But like I said, you can use any brushes that you want, any watercolor brushes that you have, or any of the standard brushes in Procreate. So I have a couple of different standard round brushes here. I've got a regular one and a blendy one, a textured one, and I'm going to be using the one that's called Standard Round Pressure Lighter, but you can use any brushes that you want. So I'm just going to pick a color and show you what I mean. I'll just start with this peach color. And I'm just gonna start up here in the corner with a peach color, and I'm just gonna make kind of a blobby shape. So I did the outline, I'm just filling it in. And you can see where I'm pushing harder. See, I'm pushing here harder, and it's kind of like erasing a little bit, like if I'm adding more water. I'm just gonna kind of like go around the edges a little bit. And I haven't lifted up my pen this whole time. I'm gonna make a couple more little blobs, and then I'm gonna switch colors. So I'm just kind of tracing along the edges. I'm not touching the shapes on each other. So I've got that pink. I'm gonna kind of switch it up and move to this more peachy red here. And then I'm just gonna keep going. I'm trying to be as random as I can, though obviously we've got some edges in the corners here that I'm roughly following. And again, I'm just not lifting up my pen. I'm sort of playing with the level of pressure that I'm using, and this will depend on the brush that you're using. But it's a really good way to kind of get to know some new brushes, to just kind of play like this. And it's an interesting exercise because you can kind of catch yourself following patterns without even realizing it. Like here, I made this the same width as that. And if you try to notice, are you actually following a pattern when you're trying to be random, and why are you doing that? And it's not necessarily a bad thing, but it's just something that you can kind of keep asking yourself and have this dialogue continually going on. And that's why, one of the reasons why this is a good exercise. So I'm just going to continue making a couple smaller blobs here. I'm just going to switch over to the actual red here and keep on going. Just kind of playing with some very tiny shapes as well, and different kinds of lengths and widths. So I'm kind of thinking I may want to transition over into like a green, like a yellow and a green in this direction, and maybe more into like a purple down here. So I think I'm just going to start with the purple, and I'm just going to kind of go in here and look for like more of a reddish purple, but I might still change. I'm going to go with this, but I'm going to change the value. So on the value tab here, I'm going to lighten it a little bit and also make it a bit more saturated with the S. And then we'll go with that. So I'm going to kind of go down in this direction now. I could change the size of the brush, but I'm kind of wanting it all to look pretty uniform. So I'm using kind of a similar size brush. And again, I'm doing it here where I'm matching up the shapes. I'm not hating that, but it's just something to be aware of. Maybe a couple more in this, and then we'll change to more of a purple shape. So let's go in here again, and I'm just gonna have a look at my sliders and think about this one down here, the B slider. And I'm just gonna slide it a bit more towards a pinkish purple and then continue. So even though I kind of started with my watercolor rainbow color palette, I'm not actually following along with that necessarily, because this exercise is not only about shape and, you know, randomness versus patterns, but it's also about color. I'm kind of playing around with pressure on the edges. This is not very much pressure at all, and it kind of like gets a bit washed out looking. And then on other, if you're pressing harder on the edges, you can get something like this. Let's just adjust that color a little bit more towards purple. And up here, a little bit more towards blue. I'm kind of like trying to make these split-second decisions about the shape of something based on what's missing. So if I can see that there's not been a long and skinny shape for a while, then I will add that. I'm trying not to think too much about any of this. Adjusting the colors as we go along, a little bit more towards blue. Did lift up the pen there, which I'm trying not to do because this brush is very continuous if you don't lift up the pen. So lifting up the brush is kind of like letting the watercolor dry before you go back to it. Again, moving more towards purple and towards blue here, getting a lot more blue. I'm kind of wanting to experiment with adding a little bit of blue on top of this one as an extra thing. Let's see how that turns out. And I'm just using a lot less pressure to kind of fade it into the purple. Let's just make that a bit more blue and a bit less pink. I'm going to take the saturation, or the darkness down a little bit. And I can use a lot more pressure and get a bit more blue in this. I think I'd like to make this a bit more towards the green now. Just little by little. So I'm doing the same thing that I did last time, where I did really big blobs up in one corner and then I got smaller and smaller somehow. So I'm gonna do a really big blue blob here just to even some of that out, because it just somehow I always just get smaller. So I think what I'm going to do is I'm going to trend towards green over here and then towards yellow up here so that we can then blend into the green. And actually I'll just go orange and then yellow over here. So I'm going to go back to this kind of peachy color here and just experiment a little bit with the coloration of this. So this doesn't have to be a perfect rainbow. I know I kind of started with orange and then I went pink and now I'm going back to orange. It doesn't have to be perfect. I'm just kind of trying to make sure that every new color has some kind of logical transition to get there. And there I am, matching up widths again. That's okay. Slowly moving more towards a yellow kind of place. Oh, that's a nice color. I think I'd like a bigger yellow blob that's completely irregular. I'm feeling like this transition here might need a bit more orange or red or something. Maybe I'm going to go back to this red here and just put a bit more red here so that we can transition better into this orange. Let's just go back to the orangey color and put a bit more of that in here. I'll just go back to that yellow now and start to transition that towards green. Kind of want to leave a little bit of a empty spot there. I'm just going to leave this blank for now because I feel like teal would make more sense. So just a little bit more green over here, and then I'm going to do a bit of teal down there. Let's start moving this more in a greenward direction and take the saturation down and the brightness down. Okay, let's start moving more in a teal kind of direction now. Just moving more towards teal, and I'm trying to just be intuitive with the brightness. I might just put something a bit orange in there. I'll come back to that. I'm feeling like we've got a lot of tiny going on here and here, and I kind of want to get a little bit tiny again here. Once again, just playing around with color so we don't end up with too much of the same. I'm going to play a bit with the blue and the purple over here. Now we have somehow made it back to red. I think we have a few areas that are not quite accounted for. I'm trying to figure out what to put here. I guess orange is the most logical color. Just kind of a greenish tinted orange, maybe. Well, that doesn't seem to disagree too much with the colors around it, so I'm going to leave that. But here I kind of want to go back to teal. Just going to choose that and then make it a bit more greenish and see how that looks. It doesn't look too different from everything else. But maybe we're just trending a bit towards blue even. So this is what we've got. It's a really good way to just explore color, brushes, and shape. There's also an opportunity to do different variations on this. Like you could only do triangles or squares or circles and play with a specific shape instead of completely random shapes. But anyway, we could just leave it like this, or we could add a little bit of embellishment. So I think I'm going to experiment with adding a little bit on this. So let's keep going. Okay, so it's the next day for me, and I've had a bit of a think about what I want to do with this. And I think I'm just going to add like some different colors and splatters and that type of thing. So up in the layers, we have 2 layers up until now. We have the paint tier layer and the watercolor paper layer. And what I want to go ahead and do is add a new layer on top. And I want that to be normal blend mode. So this one is multiply blend mode, but we're going to have this one be normal just so that it shows up really well. And I'm going to tap that layer and tap clipping mask. And what that means is we cannot go outside of these lines because we have some very defined edges here. And we'll just keep it like that. And whatever we add in this layer will only show up where we've already got something below. So now going back to my brushes, this is the one that we've used up until now, the standard round pressure lighter. And we're just going to scroll down to some of the other ones. So I'm just going to experiment with some of these down here and adding some different colors to these blobs. So I'm going to start with graded wash and just see how that goes. So I think I'm just going to choose this blue from the watercolor rainbow palette. And then I'm going to add just a little bit of blue to some of these over here in the vicinity of blue, which are not actually blue, just so we have a little bit of bleeding from one color to another one. So if I add a little bit here, it's kind of getting on all of them without getting into the edges here, which is what I wanted. I'm just going to actually try a different brush though. So I think I'm going to go with wet on wet number 3 instead and see if I get a more of a subtle look with that. And I do like that better. I think it's giving a bit more of a subtle effect so that we keep the colors that we've got, but we're just kind of adding something a little bit. I'm going to do the same thing here, like in the corner. Just add a bit of blue to some of these. And that way we have some variation in color on top of these. Put a little bit here because we've already got sort of a bleeding effect here anyway. And I'm even just going to put the blue on top of more blue just so we have slightly different colors in here. Because to me, this whole thing was just looking a little bit too samey. On the different color splotches, I wanted to make there more color variation on top of that. Let's just do a bit more here as well. I'm kind of enjoying how it looks if I actually use my pen on the in-between spaces here, and then it bleeds into both. So if I do like this, it's kind of bleeding into the edges. And this is just the blue. I will add some more colors very soon. Let's just add a bit more blue to some of these pinky areas. Very subtle on the edges. So if it comes on a bit too bold, I'm just kind of loosening the pressure and then going over it again because that kind of has an erasing effect. I think I'm okay with that. I don't love how this turned out. This was the very first experiment that I did and it just kind of ended up becoming a bit too much still, but I'll just go ahead and keep it. Now let's go with maybe a bit more of a reddish, bright red. So the first I'm using is this wet on wet brush. And again, you can use any brushes that you want, but I just thought that adding a little bit of color on some of these would make it look a bit more varied and realistic. So I'm just trying to keep adjacent on the color wheel. So like red and yellow, that makes some kind of sense, right? If I put red on top of the green, I mean, it doesn't look terrible, but I don't think it really is a complementing color. So I'm just trying to be mindful of that. Red and purple, that's a good complementary combo there. Maybe we're almost just about good on the red. Maybe just a little bit more on this big fella. To make a bit more of a splash here. So I'm making, kind of doing a lot of pressure and then letting up on it. And it's very subtle. But I'm enjoying the process. Maybe we need a bit more on this fella as well. I'm enjoying that darkening edge effect. The edges were already kind of darkened from the brush itself, but I'm liking how coming in from the edge is kind of making that darkened edge look like it's always been in a different color. Let's try for a different color now. Let's go for green. Again, this is a really saturated green. And for this technique to work, I think saturation is a really good thing. Let's try to add a bit of variation in color here. And while I do like that, I think maybe some darker green might be good. Just very subtle. You got to be careful if it's not too dark, because then it just kind of comes out looking a bit gray. Oh, that's a nice combo. I'm a sucker for a blue and green combo. I actually really love that being blue. I'm going to keep that just like it is, but maybe add a bit of green. And then we can go on to some of these more yellowy green areas and then make them look slightly more blue in the blue adjacent areas. I'm just going to keep this kind of subtle wet on wet edge going on here. Honestly, I'm not loving this green. I feel like that should have been on the other side. That doesn't make a lot of sense. I think purple would make more sense. That's getting a bit gray. So honestly, I'm just going to go to my eraser, and I'm in my airbrushing soft brush. And like, this is, you know, the layer that I've put all of this in. So I'm going to have to be careful not to erase everything. But I'm just going to take down the size and just kind of erase some of this here like that, because I just feel like that green doesn't look amazing. There we go. So now I'm going back to my brush. Same wet on wet, and I'm gonna, with that purple color, I'm gonna add that here instead. I think that makes a lot more sense. And I'm gonna add some purple here as well. So I'm thinking I might change brushes, but first I'm gonna choose this bright yellow because I feel like this area could use some more yellow maybe. I'm gonna switch to a different brush. I'm going to go to one called Mega Bloom, keep it pretty small, and add some sort of splattery looking edges here in yellow. I'm definitely liking how that looks. It's a bit less subtle. I'm going to keep that same Mega Bloom and go back to some of my previous colors and then add some more obvious accents with that. Let's just choose the green from before. Let's just go all the way back to that original blue and just add a few more blue blobs. Really what I'm doing here is I'm just kind of exploring color and texture, and maybe, you know, maybe I'm just ruining it like by adding a bit too many details, but we'll see. So I don't know if it looked better before, but we've added some more color. To me, this is a bit more interesting. We've got some splashes going on. We've got some really indecisive areas like this and this. So I've been having a little conversation with myself about whether this needs more or whether we're done. And I do like what we did, adding that color on top. I think it gives it a bit more personality. But what I was thinking about is that there's not really a specific focal point. And if there's going to be like 3 main focal areas, then it would probably be this area, this one, and this one, which are kind of drawing the eye because they've got these bigger blobs. And so I thought maybe instead of like doing even more embellishment on top of this, we'll just do a couple of splatters in those areas, specifically just to keep drawing the eyes to those areas, because it gets a bit overwhelming and boring if like you don't really know where you're supposed to look. So I want to have some focal points because of that. So it's probably not necessary, but I'm going to add another layer anyway. So I'm going to go with my splatter. There's a couple different splatter brushes in here, and most watercolor sets have splatters with them. So I'm just going to go with the one called Light Splatter. And I'm going to draw some colors from different areas to the other areas. So like here, I'm going to draw more of the pink red colors. And I think actually I really like this color, but there's not that much of this color on the piece. So I'm going to go grab it there. So I'm going to just do a little splatter here and see what happens. I like that. I think that looks pretty good, except maybe it should have been a bit more in that direction. So I'm going to try again. And let's just try again to check around with blend modes and see what we like best here. Actually, I'm kind of liking the screen effect on it. It kind of looks like there's been some kind of a like salt added to it or something. So I'm kind of liking that. I'm going to go a bit more. So now I'm going to go with blue and do the same thing up here and see how that looks. It's a bit subtle. I'm not hating it though. It's not really what I planned to do, but I kind of like how that looks. So over here, I wanted to have the yellow right on top of this if we can. Yes, definitely am loving that. Okay, so this is not exactly what I had in mind, this blend mode here. I'm just gonna put a bit of yellow here as well. This is not exactly what I had in mind when I said I wanted to draw the eye in. It's still not really enough. Let me just see if I can make that brush smaller and add even more here. It's definitely helping to make it smaller. I might do the same thing down here with that pink. And then over here in the yellow, just a bit more in a smaller variation of brush here. Okay, that's definitely adding a little something. I'm still not quite finished. Let's just add one more normal layer there and see what else we've got here. We've got a very strong splatter. Maybe I'm going to put this here and then make it a clipping mask. It happened automatically, but you can just tap and tap clipping mask. If it doesn't, let's see. Yeah, I think that's giving us a bit more interest. And maybe let's do some green as well in the splatter. Okay, I like that. I think that's adding a bit more of the interest I was looking for. Maybe down here we need a bit more work as well with that same brush in the normal. Actually, let me just name these. Okay, I've just renamed these because that was getting a little bit ridiculous. So I'm going back to the big splatter layer. I've got my pink. I've got my regular splatter brush here. And I'm just going to add a little bit of interest to specifically to this area. Maybe we'll go with another color as well. Maybe purple, dark purple. And now let's just add a bit more here. So I'm going to go back to that same pink, do a little bit of a splatter in that, and then we're going to go back to the yellow and do more of a splatter in that as well. Okay, I think I'm done. There's obviously a lot more you can do with this. You can use it as a background for something completely different. You can, you can draw little circles or stripes or anything like that on top of the squares to add some pattern. And you could even duplicate this one to make that whole thing a lot darker. You could play around with blend modes to make the whole thing a lot more intense. There's really quite a lot you could do here. But it's just kind of an exercise. It's not really about the finished piece necessarily, but it's more about exploring and letting your creativity sort of get some exercise. So that concludes our little process video for today. I hope that you enjoyed following along with this. Again, this is the technique that you can use in order to explore the Procreate app itself and new brushes, old brushes, anything you want. And it's just about drawing shapes in a very random way and stretching your creative muscles. But I hope that you found this useful, and thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you next time.